Welcome to Refused Flank, a wargaming podcast exploring the intersection of competitive excellence and narrative storytelling potential.
We are recording.
Am I too close? Oh.
No, you're good.
We are recording.
Hey, this is Cam.
And this is Grant.
And this is Refused Flank. We're coming back this week. We're going to do our first impressions on Hail Caesar version 2.
Yes.
So we just got the starter set for this that comes with a little digest-sized rule book and a Roman and a barbarian force. And so we decided
miniatures.
It's a lot of miniatures. Yeah.
I think it's over 120.
It's significantly increased our backlogs.
Yes.
Not ideal. But we're excited to give it a try. We've both read through the rule book, and we think we found something. Or no, it's I Hit the Ground Running. Trying to quote that song.
Ah, I see.
Yes, I can't even remember the name of the
You're
song
good.
now.
Don't worry about
Smash Mouth, something.
Yes.
Anyways, we just wanted to share our first impressions. We haven't played a game yet. We're still working on putting our armies together at this point, but we've read the rules. We have some thoughts, some things we're excited about, some things that we're, I don't know about, and some things that we don't know if we will like. But we just wanted to kind of run through that, share our thoughts, and then hear back from you guys. If you've played Hail Caesar or know anything about it, we'd love to hear what you think about it, how you would respond to some of our thoughts about it.
Right. I just want to introduce or state what I've heard about this system a lot, because I think it's Warlord Games.
Yeah.
They're a big player in historical miniature wargaming. I think this is written by Rick Priestley.
Yep.
So it's the Warhammer guy.
Yep.
It's got a lot of players. It gets a lot of talk about on YouTube and stuff, at least out of the historical wargaming YouTubers, etc. So I see coverage of it, but I never had read the rules before, and my impressions off of hearing other people's opinions were generally, I was going to say, pretty mediocre. There were some people who really liked it, and there were other people who really didn't like it.
That was what I found too, reading comments on Reddit and things like that of people having pretty strong opinions saying like, why would you ever play Hail Caesar? And I mean, similar with Bolt Action, which is another Warlord Games
They
game.
seem pretty
But yeah, there's people
divisive.
either love it because it works well and it's, streamlined and they just like how it feels. But other people, get all in a tizzy about, well, it's just not historically accurate and there's better ways to model some of these things, et cetera, et cetera.
And with that, I just want to jump into that Rick, and maybe it wasn't Rick Priestley who wrote that section, but the rules started as basically him and all of his friends, large groups of friends, wanted to be able to play historical games in an evening.
Yeah, with whatever armies they already had built and based, however they were.
Exactly. So it had that was the design intent, and in that way, just off the cuff, first up, I think he succeeded. I don't know how you could say he hasn't, frankly.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful that they outline that in the book, that's the intent behind the design, that's what they're trying to accomplish, because then you can kind of decide, are the rules doing what they said it was going to do? And that's how you can then judge whether it's good or not, is whether it did what it set out to do.
Right, because for me, coming away from this, we'll get into more specifics later, but the thing I'm most excited about for this, I think, is a multiplayer game.
Yeah.
I think that looks really fun and exciting. The kind of go back and forth. I will say for a 1v1 system, I'm not as sold initially, but I'm willing to try.
Absolutely. I think making it multiplayer also alleviates some of the potentially massively high model count that this game could do.
Oh my.
We're looking at like how many guys are in just a single division, which is sort of how the game breaks up your army into divisions, which is a commander and 4 units or so, something in that vicinity. But each unit could have like 16 guys in it, and that adds up pretty quickly.
Or 32.
Or 32 if you're barbarians running war bands and things. So the idea that in the multiplayer, each player has their own division. And so then you're doing that. But if you're doing a 1v1, you kind of, well, maybe I want 2 or 3 divisions of my own to kind of make that bigger battle feel. But I can't imagine painting and putting together 3 divisions of Romans right now.
This is a game that's like unique in that I could see this being like a game owned by the club / by the group. This is like a game where it's like everybody kind of pitches in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, to be able
to
pull it off.
It's like it's not like, oh, Grant plays Germany or Germania. It's like, no, we just have a Germania army, and we kind of just like all collectively pitched in to have this Germania army, and we've all got a few Romans. We all kind of work together to get this force up to snuff so we can do this.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like in all the other systems we play, it's very much Grant plays Vampire Counts.
Right.
Grant plays Lizardmen. Grant plays Chaos Space Marine Night Lords or whatever. And this uniquely in my mind is like, no, we're all just kind of try to pitch in like you noted. And I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting collaborative approach, again, because from the ground up it had that idea of multiplayer in mind. But let's back up for just a minute and just give us the synopsis. What is Hail Caesar? Like, just describe it. What's on the back of the book kind of thing.
Hail Caesar is a massed battle wargaming that covers basically everything from biblical to, like, medieval. That's a large swath of time. That's thousands of years. And they do a pretty good job. And it basically does that. It's a rank and flank game. So units are, generally speaking, and we'll get into maybe the basing a little bit. I'm not sure. But it's a little free form in that way. But typically units are moved in like one big kind of square or rectangle, whatever you want to call it. And they move together. It's not individual models moving very often. There are skirmishers and things like that do move that way. But generally speaking, you're pushing around. You're trying to get flank charges. You're trying to, break the enemy from combat. There's a lot of this stuff. I see a lot of terminology that is familiar to me from like Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Yeah. And other games of that ilk. I see similar. It's like, break checks and stuff like that. But it goes in a different way. But again, it's massed battle wargaming. I think it even says that. Yes, it does. Massed battle wargaming. So it's just, this is a game for big fights.
Yes. And to that end, I think we talked about this when we were deciding whether we were going to buy and split this starter set of like, well, we kind of wanted to do that era in a smaller scale so that we wouldn't have as many models to store and paint. Yeah. But I think it's interesting.
We got a deal.
Yeah, it was a deal too hard to... We were losing money if we didn't buy it. It was one of those kind of deals.
Okay, yeah. It was one of those,
yeah. But it's interesting. They've actually, since this come out with Epic Battles, Hail Caesar. And so they actually did do a 10 millimeter version of this. I think it's 10 millimeter.
I think Warlord is kind of weird. Don't quote me on this, but they do like 13 mil.
Oh, so it's a little
and they're
off.
Like epic.
Nice.
Like Waterloo stuff or black powder. Yeah. So I assume it's the same weird scale that's slightly off.
Yeah. But I don't know how different the rules are for that. But honestly, reading these rules, it feels like this would work really well in a smaller than 28 millimeter scale because it's such a, like, it's built for, again, those really large armies, really big battles.
I know we bought the starter set, but to me, if you were just getting into this and you read the rules and you're like, oh yeah, this looks awesome, I would go 10 mil every day of the week, maybe 15, but I would do smaller.
Yeah.
Because, you want the bodies. You want lots of units. Because that's where you can get the interplay. Because for me, and again, we'll get into this, I think if you can't get the quantity of units onto the board, you lose a little bit of the strategy maybe. Because
right. It ends up just being like my one unit ran into your one unit, and now we just roll off the rest of the game.
And again, we'll get into this, and maybe I'll stop delaying, but it's this... It doesn't have a lot of substance at the unit individual level. The substance comes from command and control and the vast sweeping movements of the game.
And I think also the makeup of your division. Because if you have a division that's all heavy infantry versus somebody else has a division that's all light cavalry, that's going to be one thing. But then if you have 4 divisions on one side and that somebody has like a light cavalry division that's on the flank, but they've got a heavy infantry division with some skirmishers in the middle, now we're starting to have a much more interesting game playing out because you can have those really diverse compositions of your divisions.
Right. But once you zoom that down to one division versus one division, it might be I've got 3 units of heavy infantry, you've got 3 units of heavy infantry, and maybe yours has like a rule that helps in one situation, and other than that they're basically the same.
Yeah.
So but okay, do you have any further comments before we really jump in?
I think honestly I just want to pivot to the basing right now because I think that's a general enough idea of this and it relates to the idea of scale, but I like how flexible the system is for different types of basing. They have some recommended ranges. A lot of the way the mechanics work comes down to just the frontages. So a typical heavy infantry unit just needs to have a certain frontage of millimeters. and then that will work. And it doesn't matter if the bases are a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, as long as they're in that range. I think it was like a 50 to 70 millimeter range or something that it could be within, 150 to 220 or something like that.
They gave some recommendations, but frankly, I think you would agree. As long as you're consistent between you and your opponent, you could do kind of whatever you want.
Yeah.
It might, maybe not whatever you want, but within reason and what looks cool to you.
Yeah. And because of that, you could play at smaller scales really easily, because you could use even just the same frontages but have smaller guys on those bases. You could do what we're doing is multi-basing, so we have individually based guys so that we could potentially use them in other systems like Saga or something. But then on Sabbat trays, I don't know, is that how you say that word? I've never said it out loud.
I've always said Sabo, but
Sabo.
I don't. I bet Sabo is what I think of, like the tank shell.
Oh,
you ever heard of a Sabo shell? Actually. Oh, okay. We won't get into that. Cool. But maybe it's Sabbat. I don't know.
I've just never said it out loud. It's one of those words I've only read.
The T has always been silent to me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know.
Well, if somebody does know, tell us.
Let us know
in the comments. But anyway, so we've got those bases so that we can stick our individual guys in there. But even with that, we can just 3D print different ones of those to have fewer guys per frontage. So if we decided, well, I don't want to paint another whole division, you could just as easily spread your guys out a little bit more across the frontage. It maybe wouldn't have the same look and feel, but now all of a sudden you have twice as many units because you just spread your individual models across those frontages a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. And that's pretty cool that you can just be that free form. There's no like minimum unit size is 10, and that means literally 10 models. Because it matters, because we're doing like wound removal.
Yeah,
that
and we'll get into that at some point as well, I'm sure. But a lot of it is based off of the center of the unit as well.
Yeah.
And so, again, as long as you're within reason, like you're not too far off, those centers of the units are what is going to make a lot of determining factors mechanically. I do wonder, in reading some of the rules, how weird it would end up getting if you were playing against somebody who was technically still within the range, but a little bit different than yours for how things ended up lining up, or whether some of the things are like, well, you can't charge that unit if your leader isn't directly in front of part of their unit.
Yeah.
And if they have a narrower unit frontage, then that's going to happen more often where you're not actually. Yeah, exactly. So not that, anyone in our group would be gaming that for advantage, but it just came up where it sounds really flexible on the surface. But if people are engaging with that flexibility, does it end up creating weird interactions on the table? I just don't know without playing. Yeah.
No, that's, I think, a reasonable concern, because you're right. I don't want to jump into things I'm not 100% sure on yet, but I agree that whole sense of like, I have to be directly in front before I can charge you.
Mm-hmm.
I could see if you have at least somewhat massively inconsistent frontages that could result in some weird situations where they can charge you but you can't charge them,
right?
And that would be not necessarily the most fun.
But that's, again, I think maybe I'll just jump into this as well, but the rules are written in a very colloquial way, I guess, for lack of a better term. It almost, I think we talked about this before, but it almost feels like some guy at the club is explaining to you how to play the game, is how it reads. And so there's a lot of repetition in things and a lot of restating of things. But in that style, there's also a lot of caveats of like, and this might not quite work out always, but you can just figure it out, right, guys? And there's a lot of that throughout the book, which as a gamer and a person, I appreciate that approach when I'm at the table with another person actually playing a game, because I think that's the best way to play, to make sure both people are having fun, to not get the game bogged down and just flipping through the rule book, but to just come to an agreement and move forward with the game with something that makes sense. But I'm not sure how I feel about that being how the system's built from the ground up, relying on a lot of systems that maybe it just doesn't always work, but you'll figure it out. It just feels a little messy to me sometimes. So I think it's hard to say without actually playing it, how often does that become an issue or not. But I think it's just for me, when I'm reading a rule book, if they say that too many times, it starts becoming a red flag for me.
Yeah, going with that too, at least they have a really good, like, quick reference in the back. That was very nice. But if that wasn't there, I will say I think finding specific rules might have been a little difficult. Absolutely. Because now, admittedly, part of that's they give a lot of examples. which is great, especially in that charging section, which frankly clarified things for me way more than the actual rules text did. Now, some of that might have been on me, where I'm kind of like, oh, I know how charging works, kind of like
so you're skimming a little,
kind of skimming, and then I like look at the example, and they're like, yeah, see, he can't charge there because he's not directly in front of the. I'm like, wait, what? But stuff like that.
Yeah, and honestly, when I was flipping through the quick reference, which is honestly a pretty long section, but it felt like this could have just been the rule book, because it is the rules in a more streamlined, direct fashion. And it feels like the whole beginning part of the book is the verbose, again, like somebody explaining to you how to play the game.
Right.
Which is just
what
obviously...
What is a war game? Yeah. We're going to sit down together and we're going to play war.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It means we have armies and we fight with dice.
That's like honestly pretty much how it feels.
It's like how, what is it? Does every RPG book have a beginning where it says, what is an RPG?
Right.
We're going to simulate an experience together. And it's like, well, if I bought the book, I mean, most likely I have an idea, but no, I get why it's there.
Absolutely. And again, I'm not opposed to that. It's a stylistic choice in just how you're going to write your rule book. And I think this just swings kind of to the other end versus something that's very sterile. Like we're just trying to be as minimal as possible and just lay out exactly in the bare bones terms as we can. Like maybe 1-page rules would maybe be the opposite end of the spectrum, where there's no fluff, there's not really much explanation. It's just bullet point. This is the rule, moving on.
Sure. Jumping off from that, I don't have an exact good segue from there. Do you have any further comments?
I don't. Jump into wherever you're headed.
I'm just going to jump in. One thing I really liked about this system, and this is kind of getting into the core system, is how orders work.
Yeah.
There is a caveat, because there's a good and a bad to this. I really like how it encourages you to be narrative in your orders.
Yes, I love that.
We kind of talked about that, I think, in a past episode. I think at least briefly, but this literally is exactly that, where it's like, you don't just say, I'm going to move up 6 inches or whatever. It's not mechanical in that way. It's my warband unit. I'm commanding them. I want them to advance to that fence.
Yeah, or capture that hill.
Or whatever, right? And and that's what you're supposed to say. Now, maybe you be a little more specific, but it even kind of says, like, if you're too vague, then, like, things happen. So you want to kind of be specific. But I love how that works. And then you combine it with the movement, which is coming from Warhammer Fantasy. Just a breath of fresh air, where it's kind of just like, just kind of move over there. And it's like infantry moves 6. What was it? Is it skirmishers move like 9 or something? I can't remember. I
honestly don't remember.
But cavalry moves 9. I forget. But there's different movement rates, but they're pretty standardized. And I think it's 6, 9, 12. Maybe light fast cav moves 12 or something per order. And essentially it's just like, well, then you roll to see if you get to do that. Now, this is where the caveat comes through, where basically I feel like so much hangs on these order rolls.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how much I like that. I think this is a pretty big criticism a lot of people level at the game. And essentially, for those who don't know, you have these commanders over each of these divisions. That's kind of how armies work. There are a bunch of divisions, 1 or more, and there's a commander for each one. And when you want somebody to do something, you give them an order. You say, take that hill. And then you roll 2 dice, and you have to roll under a numeric value, usually 8.
Which is the commander's like leadership or order value.
Like command value. And however much you roll under that, the more orders that unit gets to make at a cap of 3.
Yeah.
So if you rolled a 7, they get to make 1 order, which to execute the order you gave them means they're going to move 6 inches towards the hill.
Right.
Or whatever. Or if you rolled a 5, they're going to move 18 inches towards the hill. Now, if your order was, for example, I want them to advance towards the hill and attack anything on the top. Now, if somebody was up there, now it's maybe a charge and there's some like more intricacies there. But you can kind of account for that, and they kind of describe that too. It could be like advance to the top of the hill and then prepare against any oncoming opponents again.
Right,
and that's
be ready to countercharge kind of a thing.
Right,
yeah.
so
or
it's
run
like
up to the fence and shoot at anybody you see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it encourages again kind of that. I don't want to say role play, but you're getting into
it is that though. I think
you're getting into that.
And
I like that. But I do though at the same time, if you fail one of these orders, then that commander is done. So what that can mean is, Cam, you go and you move everybody, potentially multiple moves. Grant goes, Grant rolls a 9, Grant's done. Now, that's like one division game, and I think there's some things in there where you get like the commander of the entire army gets like a reroll once per turn. So there is some safeguards in place. But that
I think they have a whole section too about playing smaller games because they need to make some tweaks. But yeah.
But the possibility exists, and again, this could happen in a multiplayer game where somebody got to do a bunch of stuff, and then you get one guy who just keeps rolling 10s on command checks and gets to do nothing. And that's kind of a feel bad. There are units and special rules that are like, hey, they still get to move even when you fail. And I like that. Yeah. And there is something called initiative that kind of gets around that.
So when you're close in and there's actually like an enemy right in front of you, you can still do things like charge and fight, which I think is helpful because then at least at those critical moments, you're not just doing nothing.
Right. But I can definitely see that being like, what? You know,
absolutely.
But I love the like implementation and how it encourages the narrative and it lets it be free form in the movement to where we're not like measuring wheels anymore and being like, oh, so pedantic. I that there's a place for that, but I'm glad that for something that's playing to be like huge battles, we don't have time to be pedantic. We need to move. But then at the same time, it's like, man, I could just like not have a turn.
Yeah, that hurts.
I don't know. I'm a mixed mind. I see it, but I love both.
Yeah, and the way dice work, that most of the time that's not what's going to happen. But the fact that it's possible and really not that unlikely, I guess I'd have to look at the numbers. But like an 8 is only just above average on 2d6.
It's probably like 30% or so. I'm guessing here. I'm going to guess it's like maybe 25 or so percent chance of just failure on an 8.
Yeah, which
like
is
a 9
rough.
or higher.
Yeah.
So like 1/4 of the time you do nothing.
Yeah. And that I think is difficult. So again, that's something that'll be hard to really make an opinion on until we've tried playing it. But I'm always, that's a red flag in any rule system that I read where there is that possibility that I just roll bad and don't get to do anything on my turn, and that could keep happening. I know there's other systems that do similar things like that. Totally blanking. Dragon and Lion Rampant, I think, have a similar thing where you can kind of like
that rule book somewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, then maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can keep trying to activate units as long as you keep succeeding at their activation command roll or whatever. But as soon as you fail one, your turn's done. But the same thing could happen where like I just activated 8 units in a row and you did none.
And that's to simulate what they're going for is like the command and control is the courier, the messenger who's going to send out to talk to the centurion. Is he making it? Is he getting distracted? Did he die to an errant arrow shot or something? Whatever. And I get that. And again, I think we've talked about this in the past where it's like it's important to remember the narrative stuff so it's not frustrating. But that's just like such a core, like you just
when
skip
you just
your
don't
turn.
play the game at all, then that's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and I think other systems do implement that better. I think just to go back to something like Chain of Command, there's still that friction involved where everybody's not going to always be able to do everything, but somebody's always going to get to do something. And the way that they do command and control, I think, gives you more difficult tactical decisions without just taking away your chance to play the game at all. So I think something like, I don't know, like I'm just making things up now, but if you had something like initial orders to start the battle that your guys are going to do until they're told otherwise, that would at least mean they're doing something.
We get to move forward.
Exactly, yeah, until we encounter the enemy or something. And that way you're not just stuck at the deployment zone until you finally happen to roll the right dice, sort of a thing.
I think it's especially noticeable here versus, say, like Napoleonics and Black Powder, too. And I haven't read Black Powder, so I'm assuming. But I noticed in here, shooting doesn't take an order. So even if they can just shoot at things that are closest to them or whatever, that just happens because the units do it naturally. So I would assume, because they're kind of the same core system, Black Powder has a similar thing. So even if you fail all your orders, if they run at you, you can still shoot at them. Your guys are going to shoot at them. You don't have to... Whereas this is like, it's Ancients game. You might have some archers that are throwing a few dice every once in a while. But
but it's by no means the bulk of what's happening.
The majority of what's happening is infantry.
Yeah.
Like, unless I guess you're playing like Parthia or something, with all horse archers. But like, at least for the starter set we have, it's pretty much all infantry.
Yeah.
So if people can't move, it's just like, well, I just like
I'm just not playing the game.
We're just playing Time Warp or whatever, where it's like you just got to move twice in a row.
Yeah.
But I'm hammering on about the negatives, but I really want to state, though, I do love the order, like the whole get over there and attack that unit.
Yeah, the narrative aspect of giving the orders, I think, is fascinating. I absolutely love that approach.
So I want to end on that because I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you have something you want to highlight or lowlight?
Yeah, I think you mentioned this maybe briefly earlier, but there's a combat results table. So the combat is, again, it's not man-to-man, so you're not pulling off models. You have these multi-based units, and all your guys are on there, and they just stay on there until the unit is removed from the table. So instead, you're using casualty markers or tokens or something like that in order to mark the degradation of the unit to certain different points. But after a unit fails or loses a combat, they're taking a break test. There's some other things that can trigger those, but you're rolling on this table. And what I like about it is that it takes into account the type of unit that's being affected, the situation, how bad it is, like how much did you lose by, that sort of a thing, and then calculating out what's going to happen. And so a combat result that might completely rout some skirmishers because they don't want to be in a stand-up fight sort of a thing wouldn't really have as much impact on some heavy infantry like Roman legionaries or something like that. So I really like that because it creates a lot more different interactions, which I think is different than, say, something like Warhammer Fantasy Battles, where it's like my Chaos Warriors are going to react to losing combat in the exact same way that your militia of the Empire or Skaven clan rats are reacting to losing the combat, which doesn't quite make sense in all situations. So I like that. I think that that's going to create some really varied, interesting combat outcomes, which again helps with the potential seeming sameness between a lot of units. Whereas if you do start bringing some of those different unit types, you can start seeing some of those interesting interactions.
Sure. And then going along with that, I like that some of the special rules, the crunch or whatever, they're also simple.
Yes.
It's not like, I don't know. I can't think of anything. A lot of these, I'm just going to throw it out. A lot of Warhammer special rules where they're like all these like stat buffs, like Furious Charge, +1 initiative, +1 strength across all these, like this huge buff for like one turn when you do this. And this, it's like, we got like tough fighters. It's
they
like,
get
what
to
does that
reroll
do?
one die.
You reroll one die out of like, 7 or something. So it's like, well, that's good. And they even say like, you should only give this to the units that you're like, are like the elite bad boy units, and it's like, man, they get to reroll one hit, and it's like, and they're probably hitting on 4s or whatever. So it's like, woo! But I love how simple those are. I like how clean they're written as well. Like even some of the more complicated ones, like say, I don't even know what I could call complicated, but like maybe the Parthian shot ones, and there's some of the weird spear things, but like drilled, which we see a lot with the Romans.
Yeah,
that's pretty simple. And I love how easy to understand all of it is. And then you add that to kind of what you were talking about with the unit type differences.
Yeah.
I think that might give it just enough crunch. I put down like crunch in my notes as kind of like mid of the road. I think I want a little more in my dream game of Ancients. I think I want a little bit more than this. Or maybe a lot more. I don't know. Maybe I'm a masochist. But I want more than this. But it's not as, I think it gets a reputation of like
simplistic
crackers, like no cheese, no salami on these crackers. It's just plain saltines, and that's all you're getting with this. It's very like everybody's the same. And I'll be honest, I've watched some battle reports of this game where it's like English Civil War or something, where it's like both sides very similar army lists or the same army lists.
Yeah.
So the forces are very similar. It does sometimes come across like, well, we ran at each other and then he rolled 3s because he got the better like command roll off, and then I got lucky kind of because he failed on the 3s, and then now I hit on 3s versus the 4s, and we just kind of go until somebody gets shaken and gets it makes it feel like the combat is less about like setting up good matchups and more about like, can I hit more 4-ups than you?
Yeah.
And I don't know how much I love that, at least looking at it from here. However, somebody more experienced might say, Grant, that's because it's trying to incentivize you to go for flank charges, go for whatever.
Supporting units, things
right.
like that. Yeah.
It's not, if you just throw a unit into another unit and they're exactly statted the same, it's going to be 50-50 who comes out. And that's what the dice take care of. You can't control that. So I'm like, well, sure, it just, from where I'm coming from.
Yeah, where in Warhammer, everything's a bespoke unit that has some slight difference from every other unit.
And I'm thinking of matchups like, okay, yeah, no, I want that unit to go in this. It's like, well, my heavy infantry are going to go into your heavy infantry. And, well, who knows what's going to happen, really? And
but I think that's where, like we said before, the rules start to shine at those larger battles because more of that can happen. Whereas, again, one division versus one division, it's much more likely to end up just being those one-to-one kind of matchups. You don't have enough maneuverability of your forces to wrap around, break through a flank, things like that.
And that allows you to kind of tell those stories a little better, too. Whereas otherwise, again, if you're doing like a 4-on-4, like 4 units versus 4 units, you might just have a bunch of grinding melees. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, and maybe there'll be some flanking, but yeah, once you double that, let's say you have 2 divisions, now you're up to like 8 units a side or something. Okay. And maybe some cavalry. Now we have some things going on, whereas I could see that it quickly getting more interesting the more units that are on the board.
Absolutely.
And again, and that's where the heart of this game is, kind of going back to why this game exists.
Yeah.
Right? And it's to get a lot of stuff on the board and make it playable. It's not trying to make you think about individual matchups like at the level that Warhammer Fantasy is or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It's just trying to be like, well, can you get the flank charge? Can you get around the opponent? Can you get behind them?
Which I think is interesting because then that puts a little bit more emphasis on the whole tactics and strategy on the battlefield, maneuvering your units rather than, well, I brought my Death Star unit that's like a dragon with all these magic things. And so it helps draw back from that. And I think that's one of the elements that lets them, and they talk about this in the rule book, but lets them cover such a broad range of history because a lot of units throughout that period of history, despite it being thousands of years, still fought relatively similarly from biblical times up through medieval. And so it makes sense that, you're not going to have a unit that is significantly stronger when they're armed and armored in relatively similar ways.
Right. And worth final note kind of on special rules and stuff. I like too that they make a note to say, like, even in the special rule explanations, like you could just give these to units. So when you and your friends are making these battles and armies together, you could be like, I'm just going to give this one unit tough fighter just because, like, and it's probably not going to like sway the whole game. But if you guys like narratively are like, this is the elite legion, this is Caesar's 10th or whatever, it's like, we'll just give them tough fighter. Why not? And they encourage you in doing that. And they even say, like, you can tweak some of the special rules. There's like some where you like rally from disorder before orders or something, which is like a big deal. And you could be like, well, if you want to make it more often, you could make it happen. You could just tweak the die roll, the target number you need. And it's like, and they seem pretty chill with you doing that. It's very much, they give you permission.
It's almost like a sandbox toolkit.
Yes.
Yeah, in this base book. And then they have a lot of other supplements that cover different periods of history that give you some more of the stats and specific rules for, like, how would the Roman legionaries be fighting in the forests of Germania, things like that.
And I would be curious to see, if we get to that point, how much fluff and crunch those add. I've seen things like, and I didn't see any of that in this book. I thought there was going to be stuff about like unique commander traits and stuff. And I don't know if that'll just come in like the army book thing or the supplements. But I've seen battle reports where they're like, oh, this commander, he's brave or whatever, so he's like better in supporting in combat, but this guy's like cowardly and he like runs or whatever. And I'm like, oh, there's some of that little like flavor, make each commander a little unique. He's not just a circle that just kind of moves around. And
right. It feels like they have some character. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think I had 2 things that kind of came out of what you've been talking about there. One is the idea of a crunchier system. One thing that's nice about the flexibility of the basing in Hail Caesar and the way that we've now based our units is that we can use them in other systems. Yes. So there's quite a few other ones. I know DBX is another pretty big historical game.
There's DBM and DBA, right?
And then you were talking about one that's grid-based. I can't remember the name of that one off the top of my head.
To the Strongest?
I think that's what it was, yeah.
Sorry.
And so it seems like all of those we'll be able to try out if we want to later, just with the different basing options, and we can design and print new trays to stick our guys in to just fit whatever those are. So I like that about this approach, and starting with something that's flexible like this just means we can kind of flex in to those other ones. Another thing you brought up was the idea of units just kind of grinding down. I've been playing a computer war game recently called Field of Glory, which I think might be based on a tabletop game. I never quite figured that out, but it essentially
there is a Field of Glory game. Actually, I think you're right.
I think it is a tabletop game of some kind. I don't know if it's a miniatures game or a board game or what, but it's on the computer version, it's essentially like hexes.
Okay.
It shows up as squares, but your guys can be like at the corner of the square kind of thing. So essentially hexes. But yeah, once your battle lines clash, it essentially feels like what you're describing here, which is, well, all my heavy infantry are fighting your heavy infantry. And so it kind of just comes down to morale and like who did get the edge there, unless I am able to break through in one spot and then get an extra unit helping out and that sort of thing. And I think that's where the mechanics of Hail Caesar's combat are really interesting in their simplicity, because having that one extra unit supporting by being behind or beside a unit that's in combat gives you that little bit of an edge that may push it over. So it's not just that 1v1. And I like the flexibility of how you get into those supporting positions, because it's a lot more, again, flexible than some other systems. Whereas in like Warhammer Fantasy, it's like, oh, I just stacked my units. Now they're just stuck behind each other. They're never going to be able to do anything.
In this, it's like, well, I'm going to support from the back.
Right. And that kind of mimics, maybe the guys are moving back and forth like the Romans would do, kind of relieving each other. Or maybe it just means that the weight of the war band is pushing forward.
The press of the phalanx. Sure.
Yeah.
No, I agree completely. I think the support system is really pretty darn flexible, and I think how it handles like multi-charges and even things like that is generally gives a ton of examples, and it's very like it executes them in a way that you would expect, if that makes sense. The only time it doesn't for me is the whole you can't charge if they're not directly in front of you thing.
That felt a little weird, potentially.
I want to try it first, but other than that, like every time they're like, this is how this works, I'm like, that just makes sense. Why wouldn't we do it? Of course.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that helps me learning the game, because there's nothing like, well,
that seems backwards.
Why would that happen that way? I talk trash about Warhammer Fantasy's rules as written, like terrain rules, fairly frequently. These ones are a little punishing too, where like formed units can't really go into dense woods and stuff. But because like it encourages you to enter into, maybe not encourages, but it allows any unit to like change formation, like into open order or whatever. You can adapt it so you can, and then skirmishers can go in. And I think because of how the game system works, skirmishers look like they'll just be generally less annoying than say fantasy. And they're less like terrifying. There's no like Dryad equivalent where it's like a fighty skirmisher unit that's terrifying and can get around you, and you're like, oh god, I got to keep spinning, or do I just let them charge me? In this, it's going to be like they're truly just supporting units. A regular unit of skirmishers going into a regular unit of like just about anything, it looks like, is going to get eviscerated. And like you said, they've got a very punishing break check chart to roll on. They break way easier than infantry or cavalry. Which is really cool, because again, to simulate, hey, they're not formed.
They don't want to be stuck in. And I think there's actually, you can't charge a formed unit with skirmishers. You're just not allowed, because they just won't do it.
You're absolutely right. So yes, all those things I like. They just look less annoying for that reason. They're truly a support piece. I like that they fit in, but they can go into that terrain without penalty. So for some reason, and I think in combination with the freeform movement, it just bothers me less. Like, oh, I can't go in that woods. Well, if I wanted to, I can. I'll just give them an order to.
Go into loose formation.
We want to go into open order, and we're going to go in there. And then as, adults, which we all are here, we'll go, okay, and then I'll pick up the unit without really taking everybody out of the tray, and I'll just put it there and say they're in open order, and we'll be fine. And then there was no fiddliness. I didn't have to get out my measuring stick and measure, like, at half rate.
Right.
And I just love that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they do say like, oh, if it's really bad terrain, yeah, you can cut their speeds in half or whatever, but you don't have to do that. Again, very free form. It just makes sense. It's like, why can't the ranked unit go in the woods? Because there's trees everywhere. They can't be in ranks. It makes complete sense.
Yeah.
I guess I wanted to highlight that. Like, all the terrain rules make sense to me in my mind. And because of the freeform nature of movement already, it's just so much easier for me to like wrap my mind around. I feel like we're not going to get, and maybe I'm wrong, I feel like we're not going to have these situations where it's like, oh, my far left corner
just clipped it a little bit.
That the base of the forest thing cut out
so
that we have.
The whole unit down.
So now the entire unit has to move at half rate for that because, and nobody likes that.
No.
I don't even think the people denying the charge are like really in love with it. They're like, oh yeah, I'm winning because of like that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's just, it's very deflating. It's very gamey. This just doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. And again, I think a lot of that relies on the way that they frame it of, like you said, be adults about it. Just figure it out. And so we'll see how that actually ends up playing. If it still puts us in situations where it's like, I feel like I want to look up a rule and put it to you. But I think I do appreciate that the rules continually encourage you to arbitrate things yourselves to figure it out. I think it's a game that would certainly benefit from having an umpire, games master kind of a person.
They say that a lot.
Yeah. And that's going to be true with anything that's a little more sandboxy toolkit approach, because there's going to just be loose ends and loopholes and things like that. But if you have a group that's reasonable and that's willing to just say that makes sense, then I think you can do that yourselves pretty easily.
Going off of that, now I'm cutting you off, I'm sorry. What do you think about the point system? Because I just wrote meh when I read it, because I was like, I think old me would have been like, of course we need points. We need to have like fair games and stuff. But I'm almost, part of me's like, I want to go like old school BattleTech balancing. So I'm jumping. You probably don't know what that is, but essentially they have a point system, battle value 2, and it's really kind of obtuse. Like there'll be like a mech that's cost like 1,732 points.
Nice.
And it's like we play 8,000 or something.
Yeah.
So you can do that if you want, and it's reasonably okay balanced. Or like old school, and all the mechs pretty much suck because the tech is really bad and all the guns are terrible. We would play like tonnage, so it'd be like, I'm gonna bring 100 tons worth of mechs, or 200 tons. 100's like nothing. Like 200, 300 tons of mechs. You're gonna bring 300 tons of mechs, and you just bring however much you want. Probably spamming lights was probably the best, but don't think about it. Stuff like that, and that just felt really loosey-goosey. And for me, it's kind of like, yeah, let's just do division versus division, and kind of like that's the balancing.
Right.
I don't know if that's perfect, but I'm almost like I don't even want to care about the points.
Yeah, I think that it just creates a difficult catch-22 a little bit, because if you don't care about the points and you also just kind of take what you have, you could end up with a really one-sided battle, because in looking at some of the points they have listed, it's like, yeah, I could take a bunch of units like, that are
I take all large units, but...
Well, that too, but even if it's like, I take all Roman legionaries, heavy infantry kind of thing, and you're like, well, I think these light cavalry are really cool, but they're like half the points.
Sure.
Now that's just a really one-sided game. Now maybe that evens out across larger games with more divisions, and you just are taking more mixed divisions and units and things like that, and it kind of balances out. But I think a way to approach that I think some other historical games do, and even things like Chain of Command have a little bit of an element of this, is just going back and looking at trying to find some historical records of what actual orders of battle existed, and then use that to base it on and say, okay, this is what would have actually been in this size of a Roman legion, and so I'm going to just take those because that's what would have been there, and maybe look into, read some sections of Caesar's Gallic Wars and see if he mentions like how many barbarians he was fighting in this battle or whatever, and use that as kind of a way to like ish it in.
Don't take Caesar at his word. It's always 10 times as much as there actually was there. No, I'm just kidding.
It's a bit of military propaganda, but what are you going to do? You got to find what sources you can. But I think doing I think that's something that interesting that historical games also do, is invite you into the history. I've even just since getting this starter set have read and listened to a bunch of more stuff about the Roman Empire and things like that, trying to figure out like how were they armed and armored and things. How would they have been interacting with these people? Like, how did they ally in these cavalry units? Would they have given them Roman arms and armor, or did they just like come with their own stuff, kind of a thing?
Sure.
And so I think being invited into all of that, you have the opportunity to let that guide you in how you build your army composition rather than relying on the points. And I know that there are other historical games that do that ask you to do some research, figure out what it would be, and just field what would have actually been there. And I think that can give you another approach to the game rather than being as worried about points balance. It's a little bit more about like, I got the satisfaction of knowing that that was historical rather than knowing that that was a balanced game. And that maybe is just a different way to approach it.
Sure.
But I did try adding up some points and seeing like, oh, what would a division kind of end up being ish? And the points do just seem kind of odd. And I just kept coming up with like odd numbers. Like it's just 372 points. And I can't really add anything else that's going to make it feel like an even number. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of hit that too. And part of it's because if I remember correctly, is there a limit on how many units you can have in a division?
I think that's on an army by army basis, because I was looking at the little thing it came with.
Minimums, right?
Yeah, and so I think like, so for the Romans it said 4+ units per division, and that skirmishers don't count towards the minimum or something.
Nice.
Yeah.
Poor skirmishers. But okay, but yeah, no, I think that's really just, I guess that's a good point you raise. It definitely makes sense for especially small games where we're probably going to be starting to try. I imagine they did some math, right? They know like, oh, the warband is costed very effectively versus the Roman legion.
Mm-hmm.
But part of me just, again, once you get to the 4-division game, the 3-division game, I wonder if it all starts to come out in the wash.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if
Maybe
people
I'm
aren't
wrong.
spamming something, or they're just taking some reasonably complex forces.
Well, you say, it's interesting because I wrote down, it feels like the army lists force you to spam.
Oh, yeah?
Is what I wrote in my notes. At least maybe I'm focusing on the Gallic stuff. I have to take like 50% war bands no matter what, and like 75% of the army has to be infantry. So it's just like, no matter what I do, I'm spamming war bands no matter what.
Yeah.
So it's just like, basically, what is the Celtic army? It's war bands and then some stuff.
Yeah, just a few things on the periphery.
Which is probably very historical, so I get it. It's just very different from where I'm coming from, where it's like, I know you can spam in Warhammer or whatever, but it's like,
there's some restrictions.
We are generally speaking, I would say too, as a group, we don't have a lot of guys just spamming like the power thing or whatever. Not that war bands are a power thing, but like, I don't know. It just feels very different being like, I'm going to have in an army with 3 divisions or whatever. How many war bands is that? That's like 6 war bands minimum or something, maybe more. I don't quote me on that, but that's like a ton, right?
Yeah.
So just a very change of mindset for me that I'm kind of excited for, but also like leery of, and being like, again, is everything just the same? Is everything being the same?
And that, again, I wonder, one complaint I have about the rule book is the main rules don't really, at least this version of it, I don't know if the hardback is any different, but there's not really any information about the army lists or building or anything like that. And so you kind of
buy the other book.
Yeah, you have to invest in, and I think the regular hardback rulebook is like $50, so you have to get that plus at least some other book, which I'm complaining about that. I guess Warhammer's the same way.
Warhammer's we just buy everything used is the difference,
and so I'm used to getting those for $10 or $15 on thrift books or something.
Right, but now it's
but yeah, I do wonder if the other army list books or so they have a couple of army list books that seem like they're specifically just stats, but then they also have some books that are about specific periods. So they have like a whole supplement about Caesar's Gallic Wars or something like that. I wonder if those have more information about composition and more interesting ways, and like maybe those are another source of some of the historical information about how would these forces have been composed in different eras and areas and things like that.
And I could see us as like a group, like assuming we play this and we're like, oh yeah, this is fun, we want to expand. I could see us being like, okay, let's do like a slow grow collectively or whatever, and be like, okay, we're getting a Roman army, we're getting a Celtic army, and then we're going to have a slow grow campaign. And when we got that book and we kind of like used it to work through it like collectively as a group, and I could see that being really fun and interesting.
Yeah.
but I don't know what's in that book.
Right. And so do we want to invest in it without knowing? Yeah, I guess we can probably find out.
I mean,
online.
I'm sure I could find out, and I'm sure there's reviews. Don't get me wrong, but that's just, again, this is a first impression sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I am curious to see what those books. I think they're considered pretty good. I think the community generally gets excited when they drop those, because I think they have a lot of that, like, the special rules for like the commanders and the like, this was a unit that in the real world like was this famous unit or whatever. I think of, like, again, Caesar's 10th Legion or whatever. I'm sure there's like probably a special rule for that division or whatever. It'll be like all those guys get like something extra or whatever, because they always did better than everybody else or whatever historically, and or at least Caesar showed favor. But I'm just curious if all that flavor is going to come out, or you get weird stuff. I think I saw a battle report, again, more medieval one, where it was like they rolled for every unit at the start of the game, and on like a 1, that unit got a negative special rule, and on a 6, it got a positive. And I'm like, that could be like, and I was like, that's kind of fun, actually. And I could see if you wanted to change that, just thinking off the cuff as I was watching. I was like, you know what you could do to make that a little more fair? Because I could see somebody being like, we only got all 1s. This sucks. You could be like, how about both sides get like 3 bad and 3 good?
And they have to just divvy them up.
And they have to pick or something. And then I could see that being fun. So it's like, now this one unit is like, they were drunk last night because they got drunk, so now they have like -1 to this stat or whatever. And I just thought, I'm like, that's kind of cute. That's a little like,
I do love that
little bit of flavor that you throw in, and I wonder if that's what those books provide.
New ways to approach it and just shake it up.
And if that's what it is, I'm kind of excited about that, but I don't know. We'll see.
I'm going to go on a tangent really quick before you go back.
No, go.
There's an old sci-fi war game called Stargrunt 2 that GZG Games put it out, and
Ground Zero Games?
And they do miniatures for it and things in 15 millimeter, but they have a similar system where at the beginning of the game you draw, I think, both motivation and morale tokens for each unit, and so they're skewed towards more average results in the token pile, but there is a finite number of them, so there's a possibility that you'll get a few good ones, a few bad ones, kind of a thing. But I always thought that was really interesting because it gives you that sense of like, okay, if I don't have a really narrative scenario in mind going into this, this is helping me tell that story, because now I know, like, why is this unit already unsteady and shook a little bit and like worried about what's about to happen? Why are those guys like really high morale and like ready to fight these people, sort of a thing? And so I do like systems like that give you a little bit of those nuggets that you can then run with narratively and imagine what's going on in your guys' heads.
And again, because it's so simple, it's easy to remember those things. Because if you do that in Warhammer, it's like it's another rule on top of the already 6 that they have. And I know I'm being hyperbolic, but it's like, I think of like, I have raptors in my Chaos Army. And it's like they have this visage thing that's a leadership thing. They have hit and run. They have a bunch of special weapons in the squad.
Right.
One's got a guy's got a power sword, so he fights different. I gave them a special veteran skill too. And all these, it's just like literally by the end of it, it's like I
can't put one more on there.
Right. So I'm going to just forget.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it's like, they have X, and that means they do this one thing.
So there's a lot more
differently.
space to add in new things without it being overwhelming.
Right. And I think they did a good job being cognizant of that when they were making the game, because I think it's, for me, if I was to design a game, I would definitely get carried away. I just know myself.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, I want to have all these rules that do all these crazy things, and it's going to be really exciting. But they were very restrained, and they're like, nope. The tough fighter, or elite, they get back from disorder on a 4-up, and that's all that it is. And it's like, it's so clean.
Yeah. All right, back at it. What do you got?
Back at it. Sorry. Okay. Another thing I wanted to highlight was the idea of disorder versus shaken.
Okay.
I thought that was really cool and interesting. They did a good job, at least for me, in reading the rule, in outlining the key difference for them, to where I feel like I didn't get confused, because when I was going into it and watching certain battle reports, I think I would get confused because they'd be like, they're disordered, and I didn't really understand what that meant versus shaken, and they just were the same thing in my mind. Now I'm like, it makes sense. And when that occurs, disorder would be like, oh, your own guys moved through your own guys. There's a chance they're disordered unless they have drilled.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going to the whole, like, the Romans are switching with each other.
They're ready to do that, trained to do it.
Right, whereas, and then disorders basically just means they can't move next turn. Or rather, pardon me, they can't take an order. So if they have bows and stuff, I guess they could still shoot, maybe? I don't know. I'd have to double check that. But they're disordered. Maybe they can't shoot. But they're disordered. They lose a turn.
Yeah.
But it's beyond that, not like a negative unless they're in combat. I think they get a -1. It's just really clean, and then it goes away. There's no like
temporary condition. Then they become reordered on their own. Yeah.
Yep. And then again, but they use that though. Then it's like elite. Well, elite means on a 4-up they get rid of it at the start of the turn, so they can still move. Mm-hmm. So it's like, oh, they got disordered. Well, half the time they don't care. They're going to reorganize because they're an elite unit. They're drilled. They know what's up. So you've taken this like status condition that's very simple and easy to understand, and now you've created another easy special rule that's like, oh, I can just half the time ignore that. And I'm like, oh, elegance. And then shaken is just like, okay, we're out of health points effectively.
Yeah, right. Taking enough hits that you're on the verge. Which
is, I guess, where we should maybe talk a little bit more in depth about the combat, because you talked a little bit about there's no wound removal. Mm-hmm. The way they articulate it is you're damaging like morale. You take saves in this game, but they call them morale saves.
Yeah.
And it's a representation of not only armor, but also like a unit's willingness to continue fighting in against like casualties.
Yeah.
So thematically, you might be fighting or whatever, and you guys could visualize like you guys being the players. Let's say you make all your morale saves. Visual, like in game terms, nothing's happened, but like narratively, a bunch of guys could have died maybe there, but they just didn't care. They moved on. Maybe it got them angry or whatever, and they're not going to run at all. It made no difference to their actual morale, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing. So it's like, because I think for some people, and me included, it's like, oh, nothing's dying. I'm so used to like pulling stuff off and having a cool dead pile to look at.
Yeah.
Whereas this is like, oh, I'm just adding like little tokens, or I'm turning up a dice.
Yeah, I think there's a weird thing for me that has to do with the scale of the models, where if it's 28 millimeter, it feels like I need to be pulling models off. And if it's any scale smaller than that, I feel much more happy to just put the tokens on and like be marking morale. And I don't know why that is. I'm sure it's just been burned into me because of how I've approached wargaming and what games I've played and things like that. But I've played Kings of War in 10 millimeter scale with War Master miniatures with my friend, and that felt great doing the Kings of War thing, where again it's multi-basing. You don't pull guys off, you're just doing that click up the morale counter or whatever kind of thing, and it felt right, and I wasn't worried about that. But for some reason, playing in 28 millimeter, I do feel like I'm going to have that same thing that you're talking about, where it's just like, I want to take the guy off because I just failed to save.
Right. And they certainly do sell like wound token markers of like dead guys.
Yeah. In fact, the starter set came with a bunch of cardboard cutouts of them. Yeah.
So you can if you want to have like dead people over the battle, you can go crazy. Don't get me wrong, but it's just, I don't know. There's something to that I'm not sure of yet.
Yeah.
That's just a total me problem. I acknowledge that. I know some people are like, why would I want to take off the models? They spent all this time painting up the board. I'm like, oh, you can still look at them on the side of the table. They're not like disappearing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That's me.
There is also a psychological effect of, pulling off a whole like bunch of your weak troops that just got eviscerated by something. So maybe that'll alleviate some of that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Maybe you'll just pull them off all at once now instead.
Yeah, is that worse? I'm not sure.
I don't know. Yeah. Oh no, my entire square is removed. Although I will say, it seems pretty unlikely, at least until you are shaken. So at your limit. And again, for those who don't know, I'll go into it a little bit. If you go over your what is it called? Your fortitude value? I don't even know.
I can't remember.
Your like hit point allotment. So let's say it's 6. If you take like 8 wounds in a combat, you'll do a check with a negative for going over that or whatever, but at the end of the turn, it goes back down to 6.
Right.
So it never lasts higher than what your value is, and then every time you go over it again, if you double it, you get like, I think it's called shattered, which is you just instantly, the unit is gone.
Yeah.
So if you had a fortitude value of like, I don't know if that's what it's called, but if you have that value of like I don't know, a skirmisher unit is probably pretty low, like 3, guessing here. If they take 6 wounds in account, they're shattered. They're dead. That's like everybody either got killed or there's so
Chased
few people left. They're just like, nah.
Yeah. And so that system, I think, builds in degradation still. So like in something like Warhammer, where you're taking off guys one at a time, the degradation is coming because you're maybe getting fewer attacks back or things like that.
Losing rank bonus.
Yeah, exactly. And so this still has that degradation built in because you're closer to getting those worse results each time that it's happening.
So overall, I actually kind of like that damage tracking system, and I think it's really cool in how they implement it with the break stuff or the break check stuff. And I like this side comment. I like that when you roll break checks, high is always good. I like that they made a consistent effort to make rolling high always better.
Yeah, that is nice.
Minor thing, but I've taught the game of Warhammer Fantasy to a lot of different people. Command checks is a constant confusion.
Yeah, wait, I want to roll double ones?
Right.
That's good.
Right, because the entire game you want to roll 6s, and then except here.
Yeah.
Now you want to roll low. And once they get it, they're like, okay, I got it. But there's that initial confusion. And they're like, oh, you rolled double 6, that's really good. No. But I like that they took the conscious effort to be like, let's be consistent here.
Yeah,
so
that does
props
feel nice.
for them.
Yeah.
Anything else from you, sir?
I think we've been through my list, so
have we? Okay.
That's all I've got.
Last thing I'll mention, I know I've kind of grilled the game a little bit on unit variety and stuff, but what I will say is what I have liked is that at least between these two forces and the Ancients sort of game, I like that the warbands versus the legions seem quite diverse.
Yeah. As
a stat block or whatever.
Yeah, with the clash value versus the ongoing sustain. Yeah.
Yep. They're really unique. It doesn't feel like, at least to me looking at it, that it would feel like these two armies are at all the same. With just a few numbers and drilled versus like wild fighter or something, like 2 rules, and then like some stat value changes just made wildly different feeling forces, despite everything else basically being exactly the same. And I think that's really cool. And they did an excellent job there. What I would be more concerned about when I was kind of being negative earlier was the whole like hypothetical like medieval armies where it's just like, knights and peasants and they're all the same. And that might be me not knowing enough about medieval history to really understand the key differences between feudal France and the whole feudal Holy Roman Empire or whatever. I maybe they were very diverse. I'm not sure, but it just feels a lot of the sameness. But in Ancients, it's like they seem to have done a good job of really like, okay, the barbarians are all about the initial clash, the thrust. Romans are about consistency and being able to maneuver through each other, and they get some bonuses there, and they got the cool formations, testudo and stuff.
Yeah.
So I just think that's all really neat. And then final thoughts, I guess. Do you have anything before I just jump into mine?
Yeah, I just think I'd say I'm excited to give it a try. I think it'll still be a while before we get things painted up and ready to give it a try. But when we do, I'm just excited to dive in and see how it feels.
Okay. I'll end it at same basic concept. I'm excited to try it. I don't know when we will at this rate. I'll be honest, I'm going very slow. But I got a lot of backlog. I'm most excited to try this, I think, with the group. I think we should start together, but I'm really curious to see what some of the new guys that we brought in were. Warhammer was their first game.
Yeah.
And at this point, if we're honest with ourselves, basically their only game, I think, for some of these fellows. I'd be curious to see what some of them think when we're like, how about this? You know, something completely different. You know, maybe not completely different, but like different enough to where they're like, oh, whoa, you know, I didn't even know we could do that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I'm excited for like if we ever get to BattleTech, that's another like,
just totally different.
How about
thing.
this? This is like a whole different like level of crunch and weirdness and completely different what you get from it. So that's what I'll end it on that. I think overall I have a positive impression. I think I was going in very cautious and uncertain because of the mixed opinions.
Yeah.
But I've come out cautiously optimistic. I'm kind of excited to play it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And when we get some more thoughts about it, we'll probably do another episode or several about our experience actually playing it, trying it out.
Right.
We'll probably cover our first one-on-one interaction, but if we get to that larger game, I think we'll chat about that too.
For sure. I think it's worth exploring more, and I'd be curious to do that fabled multiplayer. I want to do like a 3v3 with this so bad.
I think that'd be great. And I think it's built well for that type of a participation game where people can come and not really need to be that familiar with the rules, and especially if somebody can be a little bit more of that umpire or games master kind of thing to just help grease the wheels, so to speak, and keep things moving along. I think it's going to work really well for that sort of a thing, just to do a kind of one-off event type.
Maybe what we should do is like a double umpire. You and me umpire a game, and we'll have them 2v2 or something.
That could be a good way to do it.
That would be fun. Yeah. And then it's like super impartial, and we're like, you guys just go at it.
Yeah.
That would be fun. I'd almost have more fun watching, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. But, and I think then you have the opportunity to do some interesting scenario stuff where we could have some fun things planned, like little surprises.
Now. Yeah.
And so that could be exciting.
Okay. Well, thanks for listening, guys. This has been Refused Flank, and I'm Grant.
And I'm Cam.
You guys have a good rest of your day. Bye.